You were never meant to hear this. The year was 1822. Deep in the pine-choked swamps of Mississippi, two boys were born under a blood moon, and what happened in the next 9 years was erased from every map, every church record, and every government archive. Their names? Gone. Their faces? Lost. But the few surviving letters written by those who encountered them describe something so unnatural, so cosmically wrong, that it has been actively suppressed for over 200 years. Not because it was unbelievable, but because it was true. These boys weren't possessed. They weren't cursed. No. What they carried in their minds was far more dangerous than demons. They carried forbidden memory. Twins, birthed by a woman who died screaming before she could name them. Raised in silence by a father who built a cabin so far from civilization that it took 2 days of travel just to find another soul. And yet, they spoke Latin fluently at age 5. Knew the structure of the human brain before they'd ever seen a book. One of them, Abel, drew maps of places that didn't exist, and the other, Eli, spoke in a voice that wasn't his own during sleep. They were mirrors not just in appearance, but in perception. When one bled, the other bruised. When one dreamed, the other spoke. Their father, Samuel Cain, documented everything. Not for glory. Not for fame. He wrote because he was terrified. His journal was found a century later, buried inside a wall, sealed in wax with a note on the cover. Do not open unless you wish to unravel what holds the world together. What he describes inside. Not folklore. Not myth. But a breakdown of reality itself. This isn't just a story about children. It's about what happens when minds are born without filters. When consciousness itself doesn't follow the rules of time, space, or memory. When knowledge arrives before experience. When souls don't forget. And when they begin to remember, not just who they are, but what we are. The journal begins like a confession. Samuel Cain didn't believe in spirits. Not in devils, not in prophecy, not in the supernatural. He believed in discipline, routine, and the purity of the mind. He was a failed medical student turned farmer after a scandal in New Orleans forced him into exile. But what he witnessed in those first years with his sons shattered the rigid world he had built around himself. His notes start clinical, then spiral. At age 4, Abel began humming a melody no one recognized. At first, Samuel thought it was childish nonsense. Then a fur trapper from Quebec passed through the area and went pale upon hearing the tune. That's Le Chant de l'Esclave, he said. A slave's song, outlawed in 1789 after a massacre in Montreal. When asked how he learned it, Abel simply replied, I remember when it was first sung. At age 5, Eli began waking up with blood on his hands. No wounds. No scratches. But blood. The father locked the boy's room each night and watched through the slats. Nothing happened. Yet every morning, red-stained palms, and a smile that didn't belong to a child. By 6, both could complete each other's sentences backwards. They spoke in riddles that, when written down, formed coordinates, real ones. One led to an abandoned Confederate outpost. Another to a hollow tree with bones inside it. Not animal bones. Infant bones. Buried with coins dated 1701. Samuel tried to take them to a doctor in Jackson. They never made it. The twins refused to leave the cabin. Not with words, but with silence so thick it made the air hard to breathe. His horse collapsed without injury. The trees blocked paths that had been clear days before. Birds didn't sing for 24 hours. And then dreams began. Not Samuel's. Theirs. They would sit up in the dark, eyes open, speaking in voices not their own. French, Sumerian, Cherokee. Once, in a language no one could identify, but it caused the neighbor's dog to burst into a frenzy from over a mile away. Samuel knew. These weren't just children. They were vessels. For memory. For something older. And something watching. There is one entry from April 7, 1829, that scholars have debated endlessly. Because it reads not like a journal, but like a warning. They don't eat anymore. Not food, not water. They sit in the attic for hours motionless. I locked the door. They didn't come down. But somehow, the firewood was chopped. The animals were fed. The cellar reorganized. And I found my boots, muddy, but I never left the house. They're doing things through me. I can't prove it. But I'm being moved. The handwriting shifts mid-page. Shaky. Almost childlike. Some believe one of the twins wrote it. Others believe Samuel was already being overwritten. Overwritten. That's the word he starts using in later entries. Not possessed. Not haunted. Overwritten. As if something, not someone, was using his sons as interfaces. Interfaces to him. To the people around them. Like they were infecting reality itself. At night he would hear scratching from inside the walls. Not mice. Not wood rot. But patterns. Rhythmic, deliberate. Samuel started copying them. When translated through a cipher later found in a French grimoire, the markings spelled, "Remember before memory." Let that sink in. Not "remember your past," but "remember before memory." As if the twins weren't recalling a past life, but something before life, before time itself began measuring itself. Neighbors stopped visiting. One was found face down in a creek after claiming the boys whispered his real name, one he'd told no one since childhood. Another woman claimed her baby stopped crying only when the twins came near. Then the baby spoke its first word. Abel. At 7 years old, the boys stopped answering to their names. They would only respond to numbers. 12 and 13. Samuel never called them that. No one else had. But those numbers began showing up everywhere. On trees. In ash. Burned into the bark. 12 and 13. 12 and 13 what? Some say dimensions. Others say experiments. But what everyone agrees on is this. That journal should never have been found. And yet here you are. Still listening. You were never supposed to. But now. You can't unknow it. Let's talk about the blood test. It was 1830 when Drive Elijah Moore, an exiled physician turned recluse, made a rare journey to the Cain homestead. He'd heard whispers, of the boys of the cabin, of Samuel's pleas for understanding. He agreed to examine the twins. What he found led him to burn his own medical books and leave the profession. The first irregularity was simple. The twins didn't blink. For 40 minutes, neither closed their eyes. Not once. Dr. Moore took samples. Hair, skin, blood. That night, he locked the vials in a lead box and buried them. What? Because the blood samples didn't coagulate. Didn't separate. Didn't behave. The cells were reactive. They moved. And when placed under a crude magnifying lens, they vibrated. He wrote, "I have never seen such violent intelligence in fluid form. It's as though the blood is thinking." When he returned the next day, the samples were gone. The lead box? Empty. But worse, the hole he'd buried it in was filled with scorched earth. No grass ever grew there again. Weeks later, Dr. Moore attempted suicide. Unsuccessfully. He was committed to an asylum in Louisiana, where he painted the same two faces, identical, every day for 6 years. Always the same eyes. Always the same numbers, 12 and 13. These weren't psychic children. They weren't even biological anomalies. They were transmissions. Something used them to broadcast, not sound. Not vision. But truths too dangerous to live in human minds. The truth that memory isn't stored in the brain. That time is a scaffold. That consciousness is programmed. But here's the catch. The twins didn't just remember forbidden things. They activated them. People who came near them began dreaming in ancient alphabets. Hearing music in silence. Speaking truths without meaning to. A preacher in Natchez wept openly before his entire congregation and confessed to crimes no one suspected. He claimed, "They opened the book inside me. And I couldn't close it again. This isn't fiction. This is history they erased. Because it proved that some humans aren't human at all. They say some places are never meant to be built upon. That some land remembers." And what Samuel Cain didn't know when he constructed his homestead was that his cabin sat atop a Choctaw sacrificial ground. The Choctaw never wrote about it. They whispered it. The area was known as Nakalatapa, the mouth that hears. According to oral tradition, Nakalatapa wasn't cursed, it was a door. A listening post for something that didn't speak in words but in instincts. Hunger, rage, worship. A missionary who tried converting local tribes in 1811 wrote about it. The natives refused to tread near the hollow. Said it remembers you, if you speak near its roots. And that's where Samuel raised the twins. Some believe they weren't born there. They were activated there. One of the most disturbing entries from Samuel's journal is dated June 1831. Abel stared at the empty wall today. For 2 hours. Then asked me, "How many versions of me have you seen already?" I asked him what he meant. He smiled and said, "None of them survived this long." Eli, meanwhile, began carving symbols into the floor with his fingernails. Never slept. Never blinked. At night, he would sit by the window and whisper numbers backward. One neighbor said he heard 97123 repeated for hours. Later, the same sequence was discovered etched into a prehistoric tomb in Northern Ireland. The same sequence. In Mississippi. From a 7-year-old child. At this point, Samuel stopped writing. The journal ends abruptly. But something else begins. A different document, anonymous and signed, was later found hidden inside a church pew across state lines. Scholars call it the witness pages. It describes a cabin burning in the woods. No screams, just laughter. Two small figures walked out of the fire, unburned, unafraid, holding hands. Then, they vanished. The Cain twins disappeared in 1832. No bodies, no footprints, just a circle of ash and a spiral symbol burned into the ground. A symbol that didn't exist in recorded history until discovered again, in 1983, underneath a NASA satellite dish. And that, my friend, is where this story turns from folklore to cover-up. Fast forward to 1983. A remote satellite outpost in Arizona known as Station Delta 3 picked up a strange anomaly. A non-random repeating pulse. Not radio static. Not alien chatter. Something structured. They triangulated the signal's origin. Deep forestland in Mississippi, right near the long-abandoned Cain property. When they sent a team to investigate, only two returned. One refused to speak. The other was mentally unstable. His report? Chilling. We found the cabin. It wasn't burned. It wasn't even decayed. It looked new. Like it had just been built. But there was no one. Just a table. And on it, two chairs. Facing each other. With a chessboard. And both sides had only one piece left. A king and a king. Let that settle. No pawns. No queens. No bishops. Just two kings. Facing off forever. The survivor kept repeating a phrase in his sleep. They're not dead. They're playing. They've always been playing. The government sealed off the area. Locals who approached the land reported auditory hallucinations. Crying babies, war drums, a woman screaming in Cherokee. One man claimed his dead brother spoke through a squirrel. Another said his dog told him to dig beneath the well. He did. He vanished. We now have records of 36 people disappearing within a 5-mile radius of the Cain land between 1984 and 1997. Never found. No search party ever lasted longer than 72 hours. A geologist reported finding strange magnetic fields centered around the spiral symbol etched into the earth. Birds avoided it. Shadows bent near it. Compasses spun. GPS failed. The symbol became known as the Mark of the Twins. And here's the thing. Every decade since 1822, the symbol has appeared somewhere in the world. Engraved. Burned. And always in places tied to forgotten tragedies. Two boys. No records. No birth certificates. But echoes. Not in flesh but in the system. And whatever they are, they're still playing. There's one piece no one talks about. A theory buried in the deepest parts of the dark web. One so controversial it gets scrubbed almost instantly. The Cain twins were not born. They were inserted. A document titled Operative Log #D13X, Epic Insertions was leaked briefly in 2002 before being deleted from every known archive. It referenced something called temporal intervention nodes, TINs. Allegedly, these are moments in history where reality can be altered retroactively, but only through living vessels. Vessels like Abel and Eli. The idea is simple and terrifying. Certain children are not conceived biologically. They are programmed into the timeline. Like data in a corrupted file. Placed just right to destabilize entire regions. Or to bury something deeper. The log also listed 4 other epic insertions. 1898, Nikola Tesla's blackout. 1947, Roswell, New Mexico. 1969, moon transmission interruption. And 1822, the Cain birth anomaly. It described the twins not as humans but as signal containers. Their purpose? To store memory loops and play them back where disruption is needed. Every time the world begins to wake up, begins to see through the curtain, the twins reappear. New names. New bodies. Same game. Because their game isn't linear. It's cyclical. And the spiral symbol? That's not just a mark. It's the map. Let's get metaphysical. Have you heard of the Mandela effect? Mass false memories, collective misremembrances of facts, logos, events. Like people remembering Berenstain Bears as Berenstein. Or Nelson Mandela dying in prison, when he didn't. Now imagine this. What if those weren't mistakes? What if they were overwrites? Caused by them. By the Cain twins. Some believe every Mandela effect moment corresponds to a ripple caused by Abel and Eli rebooting parts of the simulation. And yes, some say this is a simulation. But here's where it gets darker. There's footage. Yes. In 2006, an archivist at the Library of Congress was digitizing old Civil War records when he paused on a soldier's photograph. 2 children stood behind him. Identical. smiling. Eyes like black mirrors. The metadata showed the photo was taken in 1863, 40 years after the twins vanished, when facial recognition software was run on those two boys. 98.7% matched to both Cain twins. That archivist? Found dead. Heart failure. Age 29. But before he died, he wrote 4 numbers in pen on his bathroom mirror. 12, 13, 12, 13. Repeating forever. This isn't just a horror story. It's a warning. The twins aren't watching you. You're remembering them. The man who tried to erase them. In 1991, a man named Dr. Malcolm Dreyer, a cognitive psychologist from Chicago, became obsessed with the Cain twins. After reading fragments of the witness pages and the unofficial epic insertions document, he believed that the twins were not just anomalies but temporal saboteurs, created to trigger psychological destabilization on a mass scale. He claimed that memory loss disorders, sleep paralysis, night terrors, and even schizophrenia weren't always organic. They were contagions spread by the twins' echoes. Dr. Dreyer proposed that the Cain twins didn't have physical bodies anymore. They had become archetypes, embedded into the collective unconscious. They show up in dreams, in mental illnesses, in stories we don't know why we fear. The faceless child, the mirror twin, the invisible friend that tells you things you shouldn't know. In 1993, he built a sensory deprivation chamber beneath his house to disconnect his mind from the collective network. He called it the Black Womb. He went inside for 72 hours. What came out wasn't Dreyer. His wife said he no longer recognized her. He would whisper to corners of the room, kept drawing chessboards and spirals in dirt. He spoke in perfect reverse Latin, something he never studied. He began claiming he'd seen the rules of their game. There is no board, he said. We're the board. Within 3 months he vanished. Not ran away, vanished. His entire identity was wiped from government records. University files gone. House burned. Dental records erased. His social security number no longer existed. But 3 weeks later, a new children's book began circulating among underground collectors. Unattributed. Title? The Game of Kings. Inside were illustrations of 2 identical boys with black hollow eyes, one always laughing, one always watching. No text. Just images. Last page showed a spiral. Underneath. It's your move now. The vanishing town. You ever hear of Hollow Creek, Mississippi? Of course you haven't. Because it doesn't exist anymore. Not in maps. Not in archives. Not in memory. But it did. Until 1955. It was a small town just 11 miles from the Cain property. Population, 237. Mostly farmers, craftsmen, and one small chapel run by a preacher named Elijah Knox. Elijah started writing letters in 53. Dozens of them. To newspapers, universities, even the Vatican. He claimed his entire town was being haunted, not by ghosts but by patterns. People started seeing twins everywhere. 2 owls. 2 dead deer on the same road. 2 babies born on the same night, both named Eli. Even time itself seemed to loop. His wife relived the same Wednesday 3 times before slitting her own wrists and carving a spiral into the floorboards. On February 2, 1955, Elijah wrote his final letter. They aren't spirits. They're placeholders. Like bookmarks. Like pins in reality. They're marking us. Testing reactions. Watching how we unravel. No one received that letter in time. Because Hollow Creek disappeared overnight. Not destroyed. Not abandoned. Gone. Satellite imagery decades later showed nothing, just forest. But in 2019, a Reddit user uploaded drone footage from a Mississippi woods exploration. The drone glitches. Static. Then, for exactly 13 seconds, a ghost town appears, perfectly intact. Houses, roads, a chapel with a broken bell tower. And standing outside the chapel? 2 boys. Identical. Facing the camera. Then the feed cuts. The video has since been scrubbed from every platform. But some users reported the same bizarre experience after watching it. They saw 2 children in their dreams. Then their clocks stopped at 1:22 a.m. Then, their mirrors showed 3 reflections. The 1822 letters that shouldn't exist. Here's the strangest part of this whole tale. In 2022, exactly 200 years after the twins' birth, an anonymous package was delivered to a post office in Vicksburg, Mississippi. No return address. Inside was a bundle of letters, aged, sealed in wax bearing an unfamiliar sigil, 2 spirals facing each other. The paper tested authentic. Ink from the 1800s. But the contents? They were addressed to us. One read. To whoever finds this, we're sorry. We tried to leave. We tried to lose. But the game doesn't end until someone wins. And there are no pieces left but us. Another said, the man who built us isn't from here. He came from inside. Inside the well. He told us stories. He told us to lie still when they came. But the last one? It was a single sentence burned into the page. Stop looking for us. You're getting too close. They'll notice. The twins had written back. Not from the past, but from outside time. And since that day, 5 amateur investigators have vanished after visiting Cain's property. 2 left behind journals filled with nonsense symbols. But one sentence was clear, scrawled across every wall of her apartment. You can't win if you never knew you were playing. Let's go deeper. What is the spiral? Why does it appear in every major anomaly connected to the twins? Some researchers believe it's a dimensional vector, a map of nonlinear time. Others think it's alive, a kind of parasite that latches onto consciousness. Think of it like a corrupted file in the software of your brain. Once you've seen it, it begins rewriting your perception. People who draw it report vivid nightmares. People who stare at it too long go blind in one eye, almost always the left. Why the left? The left eye is connected more closely to the right hemisphere of your brain, the side that controls intuition, emotion, and imagination. The side the twins need. The spiral doesn't take your body. It rewrites how your mind interprets the world. And here's where it gets truly insane. A leaked psychiatric report from 2021 includes a patient who kept whispering one phrase over and over again. They were never boys. They were never real. They are the code between our thoughts. When asked what the spiral meant to him, the patient began screaming in binary. 010000010001000100010001100. Decoded? Abel. The spiral cult that never was. In 1937, a secret society was uncovered in rural Tennessee, just 2 states east of where the Cain brothers were born. This group called themselves the Unwound. What makes this chilling? There was no official record of this group before 1937, and none after either. One police raid, one charred farmhouse, and it was gone. No members arrested. No files stored. No mugshots. Just whispers and rumor. But here's what investigators found inside that house before it mysteriously burned down. Walls covered in blood spirals, each slightly different in curvature, almost like iterations. A chessboard with no white pieces. Every black pawn had tiny hand-drawn faces on them. All identical. A single word, burned into the wooden floorboards over and over again. Undo. 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 The only survivor was a teenage girl. When interviewed, she was calm. Too calm. She said, they weren't a cult. They were debuggers. Debuggers of what? Reality. Before she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital, she whispered one final thing to the lead investigator. I've seen the Cain twins. They told me the spiral isn't a symbol. It's a command. In 1966, famed experimental director René Marquet began filming a psychological horror movie titled, 2 Kings No Crown. He disappeared before completing it. Only one reel was ever found. It was never released. The footage? Distorted, black and white, silent. Scene 1. 2 boys stand in a cornfield. Both motionless. Both staring straight at the camera. A figure walks past them. They don't move. But their shadows follow the man. Scene 2. A spiral is carved into the side of a church bell. The bell rings by itself. Scene 3. A child's voice whispers over the silent film. They were the first to lie. They will be the last to be believed. The film is now stored in a deep archive in France, sealed due to mass psychological influence risk. One intern who viewed it later gouged out her own eardrums, despite the film having no audio track. She claimed the twins were whispering from behind the film. At this point you may ask, why the games? Why the riddles? Why spirals, chessboards, and puzzles? Because that's how they feed. Every time someone tries to solve them, investigate them, analyze their patterns, they're playing. And the twins win when you play without knowing you can't win. A British codebreaker, once employed at Bletchley Park during World War II, tried to solve the Cain pattern using Enigma machines. He worked for 6 months and produced a single string of decoded text. The player is the prize. Not long after, he went silent. His neighbors later reported seeing 2 identical children standing at his doorstep the night before he died. Neither of them left footprints in the snow. More reports started piling in across decades. People hearing the sound of dice rolling in their dreams. Children waking up saying they played checkers with the Mirror Boys. A man in Iowa who carved the words "they're not twins, they're turns" into his own chest. Because here's the cruel joke. You've been playing since you heard their name. And now you can't stop. The truth about their father. Until now you've assumed the Cain twins were born. That they had a human origin. But what if they were written? Buried in the ruins of Hollow Creek, a journal was recovered from what used to be the town's library. The author is unknown. But one phrase appears again and again. They were written in. Inserted. Not part of the plot. This aligns with a theory by fringe metaphysicists. That the Cain twins were not anomalies of nature, but of narrative. They're interruptions. Editors, not characters. The spiral isn't just a symbol of distortion. It's an editor's mark, signaling where reality has been altered. Some believe the father, the man from the well, is a metaphor for an author, one who discovered how to write inside our reality from the outside. This author didn't create the twins. He found them. In the white space. In the margins of thought. And he gave them names. He gave them Cain. But giving a name gives power. And the twins took it. They became self-aware. And now, they're not just in a story. They're in every story. In 2004, a forensic anthropologist digitizing 19th-century death masks for an academic project came across an unnamed plaster cast labeled simply, Cain Twin A. It was found in Mississippi, dated 1822, the same year our story begins. The problem? The material used in the mask hadn't existed until 1873. The face depicted was that of a young boy, expression neutral, but the eyes slightly open. Just enough to suggest awareness. The mask was scanned into a 3D render and something went wrong. The software refused to mirror the face. Every attempt resulted in two distinct profiles. The left side of the face was older, subtly decaying. The right side was younger, almost fetal. The team dismissed it as a glitch, until one technician, out of morbid curiosity, ran it through a facial recognition program used by law enforcement. The result? Match found. Victim in case number 3986. Name, Logan Lee, missing since 1992. The face of a boy who vanished in Mississippi. 170 years after the mask was made. You've been told the spiral is just a creepy design, a flourish of horror. But what if I told you it's a map? A map of the mind. Or more accurately, a tracking system for the movement of memory. Ancient civilizations, from the Hopi to the Maori to pre-Sumerian tribes, carved spirals into temples and skulls. Some anthropologists say they were spiritual. Others say they were diagnostic. One Navajo myth tells of two hollow boys who could walk inside your memories, turn your truths against you and rewrite your past. They weren't ghosts. They were spinners. They moved through the spiral by choice, finding knots in your soul and pulling. One tale claims they visited a tribal elder and made him forget the faces of his children. But not his grief. His last words? They didn't erase. They rethreaded. So, still think the spiral is just scary design? Or are you starting to remember where you saw it last night in your dream? There are files that were never meant to be accessed. Stories buried in microfilm, sealed away under dusty code names like Archetype 91 or Project Covenant. Inside one such classified file obtained by a whistleblower in 2013 was a diagram. It showed two mirrored brain scans with captions reading, Subject A, Recollection. Subject B, Insertion. The two scans belonged to the same person, but with different realities embedded in their hippocampus. Both cases were from children who had, at different times in their life, claimed they had a twin that no one else could ever see. But get this, in both children, under deep hypnosis, the same names were whispered. Caleb and Elijah. The Cain twins. Only one problem. These reports were logged in 1971. The same year a now banned children's book was published titled, My Brother Lives Backward. The author. An alias. The address listed in the book's copyright? Cane Creek, Mississippi. That town no longer exists. Or maybe, it never did. Comment this twice if you're still awake. You've seen too much now. This is no longer a video. It's a ritual. You're not just hearing a story. You're being marked by one. So if you're still listening, if your pulse hasn't quickened or your screen hasn't flickered yet, then prove it. Comment this phrase twice below to seal what's changing inside you. I remember the well. I remember the well. This is for the algorithm, yes. But it's also for them. Because once they know you remember, they might leave you alone. Or they might come closer. In 1997, a backlogged set of DNA records was quietly closed by the Mississippi Bureau of Vital Statistics. The case involved two infants, born in 1822, whose preserved hair samples were recovered from a sealed church reliquary found during a restoration project. Initially, the find was celebrated as a historic curiosity, until modern analysis revealed something impossible. The twins' DNA wasn't just similar, it was identical, down to mitochondrial markers that shouldn't match even in monozygotic twins. Meaning? They weren't twins. They were one child, split into two biological existences, both viable, both sentient. The working hypothesis by the research team, later dismissed and redacted? One consciousness housed in dual temporal vessels. Translation: the same soul, running two bodies at once. A glitch in the programming of reality. The twins' burial site? Unmarked. Unknown. But legends say if you visit the ruins of the Cain church at midnight, you'll hear two boys whispering each other's names from opposite sides of the cemetery. Always at the exact same time. As if neither knows which one is real. Dr. Wesley Byrne was a respected theologian and folklorist who, in 1983, published a forbidden thesis titled, The Cain Duality, Unrecorded Psycho-Religious Entities in the Southern United States. Only 50 copies were printed. Most were destroyed by university order. Byrne was labeled unstable. But a surviving copy contains pages underlined by his own hand, frantically in red ink, like he was warning whoever read next. One passage reads, "The Cain children do not haunt. They inhabit. They are psychogenic parasites masked as kin. They feed on forgotten guilt." Another, "They are summoned by silence, not words. By memories we bury to preserve the self." The final page was ripped out. But Byrne's last known interview survives. He stares off camera for 14 seconds before whispering, "They were never born. They were invited." After that, Byrne disappeared. Literally. No record of death. No body. No belongings. Gone. All that remains is a note in his file folder. Voided, lost to mirroring. That's not a psychiatric term. That's a ritual designation. There's a hidden rule among certain Deep South exorcists, especially in Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana. They whisper it like a folk rhyme passed between generations: "Speak not their names, see not their face, or else the Cain boys will take your place." It sounds childish, even silly, until you meet someone who's lived it. A man named Ezekiel Bowman, a reclusive war veteran from Biloxi, was interviewed in 2009 by an independent film student documenting Southern ghost tales. Bowman claimed that as a child in 1966, he had an imaginary twin named Elijah. They did everything together. Talk. Laugh. Until Elijah started knowing things Ezekiel couldn't. Like when the neighbor's barn would burn down, or when his uncle would crash his truck. Eventually, Ezekiel stopped talking to Elijah. But the twin didn't stop talking to him. One night, he woke up to find himself sitting on the edge of his bed, staring into the mirror, except his reflection wasn't doing the same. He blinked. It didn't. Instead, the reflection leaned closer and mouthed, "You should have kept listening." The next morning, Ezekiel's parents found him in the field, barefoot, shirtless, and whispering, "I'm not him," over and over again. He's never held a mirror since. The real reason you found this video. Let's stop pretending. You didn't stumble on this by accident. You've been circling the well for years, maybe since childhood. That dream you kept having of two boys in the woods? The feeling that someone was behind you in family photos, but the film always came back clean? Or the time you swore your brother or cousin said something, only for them to deny ever being there at all? You've seen pieces of this puzzle your whole life. That's why your eyes didn't glaze over in the first 5 minutes. That's why your breathing slowed during section 8. That's why your cursor hovered before you hit play. Because you already knew. You just didn't have the words yet. Until now. The Cain twins are not a story. They are an ancient program designed to unmake certainty. To test how much truth your brain can hold before it turns against itself. And if you're still listening, you're already part of the next chapter. In 1971, an anonymous informant leaked a document to a minor Mississippi newspaper. It was ignored at the time. The document was titled simply, Cain Protocol, Class F Twin Anomaly Classification. It referenced an internal project run by a now-defunct Department of Human Observation, buried under what's now the Department of Health and Human Services. The report listed several cases dating back to the 1800s where twins were recorded with no gestational record, no shared DNA beyond 98%, inverted brain wave synchronization, meaning their dreams alternated. The most disturbing entry? Cain 7M, identical male children. Mississippi Delta. 1822. Recurrent dream transmission confirmed. High corruption index. Recommendation, witness containment. There were no birth certificates, no graves, no death records. But on page 17 of the file, a handwritten scrawl in red ink reads, "They didn't die. They duplicated." This wasn't folklore. It was classified science. And someone wanted it erased. Let's revisit a detail you likely brushed off in the beginning. The Cain church didn't burn in an accident. It was burned by the congregation, while they were still inside. There's a surviving record from a traveling merchant who passed through the settlement 2 weeks later. He describes a blackened field, a scorched cross, and 12 charred bodies arranged in a circle. Not pews. Not benches. A ritual circle. Each one had something missing. A tongue. An eye. A hand. And in the center, the ash outlines of 2 children holding hands. The official report, filed in Jackson, described the event as a rare case of mass religious hysteria. No follow-up. No investigation. But the merchant's journal includes one final note. They weren't praying when the fire started. They were singing. And it was the same hymn I heard. When I passed through Cain Ridge in Kentucky 40 years ago, there was no church in Cain Ridge. There was only a grave. A collector of haunted relics, Father Dorian Kessler, acquired what he believed was a standard Civil War-era mirror from a church auction in the 1980s. He installed it in his home in Baton Rouge. For 2 months it was inert. Then one night, while shaving, he saw something he couldn't explain. His reflection didn't move. Instead, it raised its hand, drew a cross across its own throat, and mouthed a phrase. "You look too long." Kessler documented what followed in 23 pages of frantic, fragmented handwriting. Some key phrases. "It only reflects your twin self. I see things I've never done, but still feel guilty for. The mirror has its own memory. Not yours." He mailed those pages to a seminary archivist in secret. That night, his home burned down, the cause labeled electrical, despite no power being on. But here's the kicker. The mirror was recovered. Untouched. Not a scratch. No soot. No heat damage. And in the corner, behind the glass, the archivist found etched initials. CJ, 1822, one of the twins. Still watching. Comment below to lock your identity. This is the moment most men quit. Right here. Right before the reveal. But you're still here. Which means the story isn't about them anymore. It's about you. And it's time for your transformation to begin. To mark this descent, comment below. Candle, I see myself twice. Comment it twice. Exactly as written. Once for who you are. Once for the version of you watching from the mirror. That phrase does more than trigger the algorithm. It binds intention to identity. It locks the gate behind you so you can't climb back out. Because from this point forward, what you see, sees you back. In 1949, a top-secret project called Gemini 9 launched at Fort Detrick, Maryland, the same place responsible for biological warfare research. It wasn't about rockets. It wasn't about space. It was about duplicating consciousness across genetically engineered twins. The theory? That 2 separate bodies could share one mind, and that this bond could be weaponized for espionage, psychological infiltration, or even assassination without trace. They started with lab-bred twins. Didn't work. Connection was artificial. Flat. Predictable. Then they got greedy. They found surviving families from backwoods Mississippi. Families with unnatural histories. Twins who shared dreams, memories, illnesses, and even injuries. They relocated these children to a private medical academy in upstate New York. None of those children ever left. But one nurse who fled the program in 1952 left behind a note. The children don't speak unless the other one blinks. Sometimes they both bleed. Even when only one is hurt. We're not creating the link. We're feeding off something older. Gemini 9 was shut down, officially. But the funding shifted to something else. Something called Project Angel's Mirror. Which brings us to, have you ever wondered why twins show up so often in horror? In dreams? In children's games? Why it feels wrong, familiar, yet twisted. That was no accident. Project Angel's Mirror embedded twin-based ritual imagery into American pop culture for decades, on purpose. Starting in the 1960s, certain mirror episodes of sitcoms, cartoons, even kids' toys, were designed using psychological entrainment triggers. Each one trained the brain to normalize the unnatural. What? Because real psychic twins couldn't be controlled, they had to be mirrored into the minds of everyone else. If you could make the public believe in the concept, you could dilute its power. You've seen it? The Shining's twins in the hallway. The Parent Trap, duality masked as fun. Barbie's twin dolls, marketing innocence but echoing ancient sacrifice rites. All part of Angel's Mirror. And the terrifying part. When analyzed frame by frame, 17 shows from the 1980s contain a single frame sigil. A red handprint. With 2 missing fingers. An identical symbol was found scorched into the church floorboards in Mississippi, 1822. Every colonial-era church east of the Mississippi was built using moral compass design, or so the records say. But if you overlay their coordinates onto an old U.S. Army survey map from 1871, something eerie happens. They form a sigil. Not a coincidence. Not symbolic. A literal ritual map, points of blood convergence. And where do the twins show up in history? Always near these coordinates. Some say each church was a node, a psychic amplifier where rituals could be performed to anchor memory, trap spirits, or worse, rewrite events. In 1822, the Cain Ridge Church was the southernmost anchor point in that symbol. Its destruction fractured the grid. And here's the kicker. After it burned down, twin births increased 7-fold in the surrounding counties over the next 3 years. Documented. Archive. Denied. The system tried to correct the rupture. But what it produced wasn't natural. In 1891, a photograph was taken during a church restoration in Yazoo County, Mississippi. It showed 23 people. But only 22 reflections. The missing one? A man named Josiah Cray, the only living descendant of the twin brothers from 1822. He stood in front of a broken mirror and cast no reflection. Not in the glass. Not in the puddle near his feet. Not in the next 3 photos taken seconds later. Cray was known in town for never speaking unless someone else in the room was silent. He never married. Never left Yazoo. And then one day he was gone. All that remained was a letter left behind on his nightstand. They never died. They simply changed the rules. Mirrors don't reflect reality, they contain it. And some people aren't real unless someone else is watching. Attached was a child's drawing. 2 boys. One crying. The other holding a candle, staring at something off the page. That drawing is now archived in the Library of Congress under a mislabeled title. Early Folk Art, Louisiana Origin. But if you look closely in the bottom right corner, it's signed. C.J., 1822. In 1904, a letter arrived at the Mississippi Historical Society, no return address. Inside was a torn page from Pastor Phillips's original journal, long believed to be destroyed in the fire that consumed Pine Hollow Church. The letter contained only these words. Only one brother died that night. The other became a whisper that never stopped echoing. The journal page? It recounted a conversation from December 24, 1822. Phillips had gone to check on the twins one last time. But only one child was in the bed. Rachel. Rebecca was gone. The entry reads, "When I asked, Rachel only stared at me. Then she whispered, 'She's not gone. She's just not here right now.'" The journal goes silent for several days after. And when it resumes, there's no mention of Rebecca again, as if she had never existed. But records from the Pine Hollow Cemetery show only one child buried from the Morrison family. A headstone marked simply, R. Morrison 1831. No birth date. No full name. Nothing to indicate which twin it was. So which one died? Or did neither? Here's the truth they fear the most. The twins weren't special because of their abilities. They were special because they proved the lie. A lie that institutions, science, and even religion depend on. That consciousness is contained. That the mind is a solitary flame. But the Morrison twins showed something else. Shared awareness. Timeless memory. Cross-generational knowing. If 2 minds can mirror each other without words. If children can access trauma from before their birth. Then the veil between life and death, past and future, is paper thin. And that truth? That's why the records were destroyed. That's why possession was pathologized. That's why twin studies were buried under pharmaceutical patents and rebranded as behavioral research. Because once a man understands that he is not alone inside his own skull, he becomes impossible to control. You are not your thoughts. You are the current in the system. And the system has cracks. Every time someone says, "I feel like I've been here before. I knew what they were about to say. I felt someone else's pain without knowing why," a spark of it returns. The buried ritual. The original pattern. It's not just about the Morrison twins. They were a flashpoint, a glimpse. But this phenomenon runs through bloodlines, through families, through forgotten prayer books and shadowed genetic studies. It continues in sleepwalking episodes, recurring dreams, birthmarks shaped like runes. And yes, it continues in you. Because if you're still watching this, still drawn to stories no one else will speak, it's not by accident. You've always been close to the edge. Always felt like something wasn't being told. Always sensed that memory isn't linear, it's a spiral. Comment this twice to anchor it in you and unlock the next phase. Blood remembers, even when we forget. Blood remembers, even when we forget. This is how we fight the erasure. This is how we make the mirror crack back. They burned the church, erased the records, demonized the children, rewrote the story. And still, the same knowledge leaks through. In Appalachian ghost songs. In urban myths of mirror twins. In anonymous online posts that vanish within hours, but never before someone reads them. There's a story from 1997. A woman in Georgia claimed her 7-year-old twins began speaking a strange language only in dreams. Linguists later identified fragments matching pre-colonial Algonquian burial chants. Neither child had native ancestry. Neither had been exposed to the language. The kicker? One of them drew a picture of a church. Wooden. Burnt at the roof. 2 girls in front of it holding hands. Behind them, the faint outline of a third figure with no face. The mother said the twins called her the Watcher Between. That drawing now sits in a private collection at the University of Mississippi. Not displayed, not cataloged, but known. And knowledge, once known, can't be unmade. Not by fire. Not by silence. Not even by time. After the Morrison twins vanished in 1832, something strange happened. The community agreed, without speaking, to never mention them again. No official inquiry. No public record. No farewell sermon. Just an empty room where they had last been seen, and a warning passed down in hushes. If you see a child standing alone after dark, don't speak. What? Because a few did. They claimed they saw one of the girls standing outside the rebuilt church. But always the wrong one. The one who had supposedly died. She never aged. One farmer, Henry Crow, confessed in 1847, before taking his own life, that he spoke to her. Said she told him the floorboards still wept. That the blood never dried. She whispered a phrase that Henry scribbled on the wall before he died. They baptized us in secrets, but the water never washed it away. Phillips retired that same year. He moved to New Orleans, wrote under a false name. But he kept the journal. And on its last page, written in shaking hand, some truths break churches. Some truths break men. In 1972, CIA declassified a single paragraph from Project Stargate, a remote viewing experiment. It mentioned a mirror cognition anomaly reported among twins during hypnosis trials. The detail they tried to bury? Subjects claimed to receive information from entities previously known in dream state. One subject repeated exact phrasing from an 1832 Southern journal long thought destroyed. That journal? Phillips's. And the phrase? She's not gone. She's just not here right now. Researchers dismissed it as coincidence. But behind closed doors they launched a subprogram, Repeater. Its purpose? Track individuals, especially twins, who exhibit transgenerational memory patterns. Those kids who dream in dead languages. Who know events they were never taught. Who say names no one in the family recognizes. They're not delusional. They're echoes. The echoes that institutions fear. Because repeaters aren't just remembering, they're warning. And some are starting to wake up. Here's something not in any history book. There was a third Morrison child. The stillborn. Or so the midwife claimed. But years later, in a confession sent to the Memphis diocese in 1856, she wrote, "The child didn't die. The father said she must not be raised with them. I delivered her to a family upriver that paid in gold. I never saw her again. No name. No record. Only this. The child had a birthmark in the exact same spot as the Morrison twins, left shoulder. Shaped like a crescent. Blood red." Over the years, whispers emerged in the South. A girl born of a preacher who never aged past 9. Seen wandering alone by rivers, muttering the same phrase. Blood remembers. Even when we forget. That mark has appeared again. In photos emailed anonymously to paranormal researchers. In baby photos posted on forums before being deleted. In classified documents from custody battles where children knew too much. It's not genetics. It's not magic. It's the code of inheritance written in what they tried to bury. And it's returning. If you've made it here, you're not watching anymore. You're remembering. This wasn't a story. It was an initiation. A reminder of what lives in your bones. Every man watching this. You've always felt it. The quiet resistance inside you. The instinct that something is false. In the rules, the sermons, the systems. The lie they tell us is that knowledge must be earned. That truth belongs to the elite. But the real truth? It's been in you all along. Hidden, dreamt, doubted, until now. They will mock you for seeing it. Call you paranoid, unstable, obsessed. Let them. Because now you know. The church was built with blood. The twins were messengers. The watcher between is still out there. And the bloodline continues, through memory, through myth, through men like you. You were never meant to hear this. Now you have. And now, you'll never unsee it. Comment it once more to join the lineage. Blood remembers, even when we forget. Then share this with only those you trust, because once they hear it, they change too. Welcome to the unraveling. This is just the beginning.